everybody. Welcome to the Albany Language Preserve Commission's quarterly board meeting. My name is Keith Curtis. I'm the regional director for DEC Region 4, and I'm also the board chair. I'd like to go around the table and introduce the executive director and the rest of the board members. To my left is Chris Howard, the executive director of the Albany Language Preserve Commission. Next to Chris, Mike McLaughlin, representing Albany County. Next to Chris, representing TNC, is Jessica Mahar. Next to Jessica is Citizen Rep Harvey Alexander. Next to Harvey is Citizen Rep Steve Rice. Next to Steve, representing Parks, is Elaine Balchinian. Next to Elaine is Citizen Rep Nancy Kirsten. Going on, Georgeson is representing City of Albany, Chris Spencer. Representing the town of Goodland is Town Supervisor Peter Barber. And last and certainly not least is Citizen Rep John Brust. So good morning, everybody. The first order of business is to consider the minutes from the last board meeting from June 21st. I can have a motion to consider the minutes. Thank you, Chris. Second. All in favor? Okay. Is there anybody here from the public that would like to say a few words?
Hi everybody, from the friends, just to let you know we're still alive. And we've done a lot of tabling this year. We just got this in, so I'm excited. And this is a table runner. It goes across our table. So next time we're at the whatever, the NYISO or the Knowles Atomic Plant, which was fantastic, by the way. Machine guns and all. We can put this across the table. I wanted to just show you a couple things. We're on budget. We're bringing in as much as we are spending. And one of the things we tried to spend it on was to help the Pine Bush kind of give decency to a cemetery that's located off Kings Road, the Truex burial grounds. So they said, well, we need some fencing. Would you like to support that? And we said, sure, we'll pay for that. And then they go out to the fence company. The fence company said, we'll donate it. So we're not spending anything. And then they said, well, they look terrible. If you've seen it, you're really, because you were standing there, you'd have to be standing right over a tombstone because the weeds are just growing everywhere. It's invisible to almost anybody. So that'll all be cleared. And now they said, well, we should clean the tombstone. So we said, well, we'll pay for that instead. And the Historical Society is going to train us, or staff, to clean them. So I think that's a pretty cool thing. I just wanted to show you our new banner and tell you about that.
Do you recall the name of the fence company?
I will send it to you.
Yeah.
Do you
What
know?
is it?
Is it backyard?
Yeah, it is backyard.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
just
you.
so they get the recognition.
I wanted to know, and I didn't ask Jackie, but I'm glad
Yeah, backyard
Jesse
fence.
knows.
Right.
Thank you.
On all these.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, super, thanks.
Yeah, the right in Pine Bush, like Jesse did, the right on all these.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the reports. Just a couple of things I wanted to mention. First of all, I think everybody knows that the rate in which Albany landfill is accepting waste has decreased significantly. And their solid waste permit, the Part 360 permit, expires at the end of 2019. They'll be asking for an extension from us because they won't be close to being filled by that date. So based on the rate in which they're accepting waste now, the landfill will probably be active until the year 2026. And the other item I wanted to bring up was there were 3 parcels that the department closed on that were formerly owned by the TNC, and they're awaiting dedication. The paperwork has been signed by both Chris and myself, and it's waiting for a commissioner's signature, and I anticipate that in the near future. So that's all I have. Is there anybody from the board have anything they want to raise at this time? Okay, now I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Okay, I just want to recognize Mike Tanger from the town. Mike, you can sit at the table if you want.
The adult table?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mention, I didn't see it.
So what do we have? We had the annual report. This is the 2017-2018 annual report, produced in-house by our communications director, Wendy Craney, with input from our staff, and an introductory letter from Keith and I. Want to read that introductory?
Sure.
Right.
So that's for the fiscal year that ended this March of 18. We also have, I thought I'd pass this around, Wendy brought this to my attention. We have a nice partnership that we've developed over the years, and especially more so in the last 2 years with Discover Albany. That used to be the Albany County Center, Albany Visitors Center Convention Bureau. It's the Visitor Center. You know,
Convention and Visitors Bureau.
thank you, Mark. They're basically the marketing arm for visitation for Albany County and the city. So there's this place card that's being distributed for family-friendly fun, and resources are on the back, and we're one of those resources. So I thought that was kind of nice. Look at that. This is show and tell today, I guess. We have our new Pocket Naturalist Guide. If you've ever been to some of these like national parks or national wildlife refuges, like, so for example, like Ding Darling and Sanibel, Florida, each one of them have their own Pocket Naturalist Guide. So it's a waterproof guide, fold out, with some of the most common species, plants and animals that you will see. So we had a committee of staff in-house that produced these, and they are for sale in the gift shop. These are complimentary for our board, and they're only $7.95 in the gift shop, which is really reasonable. So it's a nice thing. People have been asking about stuff like that for a while. So those are nice. Some of the more interesting things, I want to make sure that the board knows that the audit committee met last week, and the audit committee is required to review the investment policy statement, the IPS. That's what guides our investments for the commission. And the audit committee agreed that it was still on track. No changes were necessary. So I just wanted to update on that. Policies and procedures in this board packet. There's excerpts from a section of our policies and procedures, and I highlighted those changes in yellow, and it's specific to the sexual harassment policy. And that's due to New York State passed a law, so sexual harassment training is now required for businesses, organizations, and other prevention. Thank you. Sexual harassment prevention training. This, right. It doesn't always show up that way. And, all right. I'm gonna give off.
I digress.
I digress. So the training, so this goes into effect October 9th. So we just had training for staff, and the language in these P&Ps are reflective of that new law. So I just wanted to let you know about those. And a couple other things. Our juried photo exhibit, our 5th annual juried photo exhibit, you're familiar with that because in December you'll see all the photos up here in the room on display. Not all of them, the ones that were chosen to be considered for the People's Choice in the top 3. That's a sponsored event by the Friends, Richard as well.
You want to mention the traveling exhibit? I forgot.
Oh yeah, the Friends now have a traveling exhibit too, which is similar to ours, using materials that are like the things that you see on the wall here behind us, specific to the Friends and to the Pine Bush, and that's been in the works for over a year.
It was 2 months at the Pine Hills branch of the
right.
Public Library, and we're moving to Gilderland in December, January, and Colony in February.
And they're both going to be for 2 months each? Depends.
Yes. No, Colony's just a month. They've booked three years out. That's hard to get.
Oh, right. Thank you, Richard. Juried photo exhibit. Photos are being accepted until October 1st. It's unveiled, the actual event, the exhibit gets unveiled November 30th. And the prizes, first, second, and third prizes are awarded then by the jury. And then it's up for People's Choice Award. So it's up through February 20th. So you'll see those, and those were for sale last year. I know some of you here on the board bought those, and I believe they'll be for sale again. Smoky Bear Day is Columbus Day, the 8th of October, which is always a big day. Those things, those activities like photo exhibit, Smoky Bear Day are here in the back under special events, and pass that around if you're interested. Smoky Bear Day, those of you who are at the technical committee, I mentioned Smoky Bear Day has turned into a nice event. Like I said, I think at the committee meeting, if it rains or it's not so nice, we'll get maybe 100 people. If it's a nice day, we'll get 4 or 500. So it's a great event, and it promotes our fire management program here. And it's a joint effort with DEC, with the Forest Rangers, Smoky, of course, and our fire management staff and education staff. And finally, I just wanted to recognize Patty McLaughlin. Patty McLaughlin is our office manager, our new office manager. Thank you, Patty, for helping to keep things on track. And welcome. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Chris. Next, we'll hear from the technical committee and Neil Gifford.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
The committee met twice this past quarter, July and September. There are a couple of new projects worth noting, one of which is the City of Albany. It's the second project in this packet. It's a steward shop in a non-protection area on New Corner Road down as a light, just south of Washington Extension and down Northwestern. And it's an area that was considered previously developed for all intents and purposes. And that project is going to be like down here at Corner Park, an area that was cleared for development a while ago, but it's not an area recommended for protection and management. The other one is a project that I mentioned briefly at the commission meeting last time. Is now an 8-acre solar farm, community solar farm by the City of Albany, working with Monolith Solar, who will lease property in the town of Guilderland for an 8-acre solar garden, they're calling it. It's in this ag field up in Area 54 in the town of Guilderland. So right along Curry Road. And the details for that project are in your packet. It was initially before the Zoning Board of Appeals, who sent us the application to review. And it's actually adjacent across the street from 2 federal protected properties. It also lies between 2 existing native species sites that are protected in the preserve. So we made a recommendation back to the ZBA that was forwarded to the planning board to do the full environmental impact statement and follow up with DEC and Fish and Wildlife to do an appropriate conservation analysis. Initially, they had completed the short environmental assessment form, and as you see in the notes, we recommended that it qualifies as a secret type 1 action, and as such, would at the very least require the long form so they can take a harder look at the potential impacts of that. And then I went back to the planning board, which Matt believed last week, and I don't have their minutes not up yet. So I don't know the outcome of that initial meeting if you go to the planning board, but that's a project worth watching. The others are all updates. The only other one that I will mention is up here in Area 52A in the town of Colony. It's a proposal 8 Loopy Way that we've reviewed and commented on a number of times over the last, 4 or 5 years at least. And that's finally received final approval, and as you'll see in the notes, there's a significant piece of property that will be set aside, much like it's been done many times in the town of Guilderland, set aside to the town of Colony with the intention of being eventually added and considered protected and managed as part of the preserve. So the project has been approved, and now all those final details of that dedication and set aside and all the rest are in process in the town of Colony. The last thing that I will mention, you've seen, I think it was the last commission meeting, Blake, that we talked about the grounds team. And the last thing that the committee began talking about was looking at that grounds concept that we have and what are the potential seeker permitting implications of what we're thinking about doing. And we have a number of questions. So the next technical committee meeting next month, October, is going to be dedicated solely to that project, going through, particularly with park staff, with going through and DEC, of course, but helping us start thinking about what are the potential permitting and implications of the concept, segmentation, all of those kinds of issues, impacts, yada yada. And the committee was quick to realize that because this is not what we may be proposing to do, there's no actual proposal yet, right, just a concept that you saw. But it's on protected preserved property, some of it. The building in the parking lot isn't technically part of the preserve, but much of the surrounding area is. So the committee was quick to recognize that we will set for ourselves at least as high of a standard as we would recommend for anybody else in an area that's not yet protected, right? Full protection, if not, a slightly higher standard for ourselves because it is existing preserved, it's protected property. So we really need to be cognizant of what we're proposing, what we're considering, what are the potential impacts, what are the permanent implications, what are the communications and outreach implications, and making sure that we're setting a good example for all of the communities. You know, we've spent since the early 90s, we've been commenting on development proposals throughout the 13,000 acre study area. Well, this time it's us proposing something. We want to make sure that we hold ourselves to the same standard, if not higher than what we've asked about it. And I'll leave it at that. There are other details and some other minor updates in the packet, but I'd be happy to entertain any questions if you have them.
Neil, on the solar one,
Yes.
and I'm sorry because I've been missing a lot of
I wasn't gonna point that out.
Yeah, thanks. I know Cypress Creek, which is a different company than Monolith,
Mhm.
they've been opening solar farms in New York, and I think all of their plans for solar farms in New York include pollinator habitat.
Nice.
And I don't know how that would translate to the ecological targets that you all work on, but
Lots of pollinators.
so one thing might be to Ethan Winter, who used to run the Land Trust Alliance, is now their director of community outreach.
Okay.
So it might be interesting for you all to take a look at what they've been doing and
Cypress is the name of the company?
Cypress Creek,
Okay.
and I can get you the contact. But that way, if we're gonna be working to think about a design for
Mhm.
that project, which also has great objectives of renewable
Right,
energy,
absolutely.
maybe there's a way it can be designed so that
Yep.
it's less harmful to the Pine Bush objectives and also maybe even creates, I don't know.
Yeah,
but-
well, and not just for this particular project, but the city, of course, has a pretty wide-ranging community solar program, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. Other
Right.
municipalities are gonna be thinking about this too, so that's a great opportunity. But yeah, I'd love to have that information.
Yep, okay.
Okay, Definitely, there
So
should be a
remind me, 'cause I'll
compatibility there.
forget.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Thank you.
Okay, next with the financial report is Lisa Anthony.
Report on our financial packet is a statement of financial activities. This represents 4 months through July of our fiscal year. Revenue, on the revenue side, dues and contributions on budget through July. Government grant income is 91% of budget, and this is directly related to expenses and tends to be lower in the first half of the year. Litigation fees are on budget, and this is based on 2021 info, and as Pete said, due to a slower intake, we may see a decline in this. We may be a little bit under budget for revenue for the year. Lease revenue is on budget for the year, and other revenue is 8% higher budget, and this is due to an increase in merchandise sales. So our total revenue came in at 93% of federal business in July. On the expense side, personnel is right under budget, and we have a large benefit payment due in November, so this will catch up and even out for the year. That's for the state retirements. Travel and training is under budget, and this is due to the timing of budget and actual expenses. Pretty much across all departments for conferences that were booked early and have not occurred. Contractual is $43,000 under budget, and we have outstanding invoices for audit services and contractual services for this. This will catch up throughout the year. Communications is at 80% of the budget, and this is due to the timing of printing, projects, postage, and advertising that has not yet occurred. Occupancy is 49% of budget, and this is due to projects for the building and repairs that have not been built, specifically exhibit repair and the striping of the parking lot. Supplies and equipment are 81% of the budget, and this is just due to computer hardware and software that have not been purchased as of yet. And other expenses are slightly under budget, again due to the timing of expenses, budget versus actual. So both overall our revenue and expenses came in under budget at 93 and 83%, giving us a higher net income of 107%. Okay. Moving on to the statement of net assets, cash and cash equivalents decreased slightly just due to an increase of spending over last year at this time. Our conservation and land reserves remain the same. Grants receivable increased due to money owed for DEC from April through July. This has been paid. Accounts receivable increased. This is due to an increase in mitigation funds owed. Again, this has been paid. Inventory remained the same. Prepaid expenses are zero, and this is due to the timing of year-end expenditures, and this will happen every year. We will see a large prepaid expense in March for the following fiscal year. Investments increased $93,000 due to positive performance. Capital assets remain the same, and deferred outflows remain the same. This is GASB 68 and 71. Again, you'll see this change at the end of the year, end of the fiscal year in March. We get that calculation from the retirement systems and actuarial calculation. Plug in the numbers for. Liabilities, accounts payable and accrued expenses decreased slightly to the repayment of a bond loan. Deferred revenue, this decreased $27,000, and this is due to an advance from DEC that has been utilized, therefore, for the accounts receivable and asset side. Total liabilities, or New York State pension liability, again, this is GASB, this will change in November. We'll leave the actuarial report from the New York State retirement system, and total liabilities decreased $33,000 for last year due to the DEC advance being utilized. The net assets, both capital assets and reserve funds remain the same. Unreserved assets increased to $100,000, giving us a total increase in net assets of $200,000 with a positive NOI of $107,000 and an increase in investment of $92,000. Any questions for that? On the investment summary, the reserve fund had a slightly positive performance, and this is total realized gain and unrealized gain, and the beginning value minus the admin expenses. You'll see it is, the ending balance is a little bit lower, but we back out the admin expenses to get the true annualized rate. Both the Discovery Center and Endowment had a positive performance, coming in at 2.32% and 2.92%, giving us an overall gain of $93,000. Any questions?
So I have a question. I know that we can own property now. Is that gonna end up on our asset sheet at some point? Is it buried in there somewhere? I just don't know where it is.
It's
or-
not buried in there yet. It will end up on the expense and balance sheet.
Okay, but I mean, in terms of the value, the asset value of property.
It depends on how we book it with the auditors. When we purchased land last time, it was a direct expense and a direct hit to the income statement. So, we can hold it though, so we have to review that with Frank, with Majeski, when we purchase it and how it's purchased, and then we'll be repaid.
Something I was gonna ask
Yeah.
the accountants, like, how do we book this, how do we show it? And just for clarity, we can't own it yet, because it still hasn't been signed.
Right.
So that bill hasn't yet been sent by the Senate to the governor for signature.
And
Kind of low.
when we bought
There's
it
higher
last.
priorities for the Senate to get over for its signature.
Yeah. When we purchased it last time, it was a direct expense on our income statement, but this will be reimbursable, so it'll be over. Here.
Okay, moving right along, to our action items portion of the agenda. It's the time of the year where we elect our officers. We have Elaine Ball-Tinian for vice chair, Don Sapos for secretary, and Don Brust for treasurer. As far as I'm aware, they're all agreed to hold those positions. Does the board have anything you want to discuss about this, or should I just? Okay, so can I have a motion to re-elect 3 officers? So moved. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great.
As the chair.
No. Okay, so now we'll go to the presentations. Aaron with the Carter Kids Film Festival.
Good morning. Sure, yeah.
What's that?
Which one?
We gotta hit the button.
Right? Yeah. One moment, please.
She did it.
Okay. While the projectors are warming up, just this past August, we had our first ever Carter Kids Film Festival. The film festival was 4 kids and 5 kids, ages 10 to 17. This was a public event, and last December 2017, we started working with kids in helping them to develop their own creative film that somehow interpreted Albany Pine Bush. So these are short films, 5 minutes or less, and each film that was created through the film festival was done by a child somewhere ages between 10 and 17. It was a great success. We had a small group that submitted films. We had 5 films submitted, but each one was amazing. Each one was very different and employed different filmmaking techniques. So we just wanted to give you a quick recap on this event, and we hope that this becomes an annual event here at the Pine Bush. So again, it's 4 kids and 5 kids. The schedule is actually, we've been working on this a while. We came up with the idea for a film festival years ago. We attempted it once and we didn't have much success, so we took a little break and regrouped on it and we tried it again. And we included some workshops for kids because a lot of kids may not have any experience in making films, and from the filming to the editing. So we offered a couple of workshops. We worked with the Saratoga Film Academy, and they came down and did a couple of programs and taught kids how to use different types of equipment, anything from an iPhone to a more sophisticated camera. So we did those workshops in December. We had an editing workshop in April where we used some online software for editing the films. Then there was a film submission period between May and July. And we reviewed all the films, and all of them were great and made it into the festival, and we showed them in August. So here's just a couple of pictures from throughout the year. Here's some photos from, we had an animation workshop so the kids could practice moving. They had figures for them to practice with and basically practice stop motion animation, which some children did use in their videos. Here's an editing workshop, and this was getting some experience using cameras. We had some guidelines that the kids needed to follow. So they needed to be original. They had to be careful about if they were going to use music or footage from any other place, that we had to look into the legal aspects of that, make sure everything was legal. The films had to be 5 minutes or less, and there really was a range. There were some that were maybe a minute and some that went up to 5 minutes. They had to be family appropriate, so rated G. And some more guidelines about format, and then a license that allows us to be able to utilize their films. So on August 29th, we rolled out the red carpet, and the families all came, and we showed their films, and we were really happy to have Debbie Godecki from Discover Albany. She runs the Film Albany program, and she came and welcomed and thanked all the kids and did a special presentation. So that was really fun because Film Albany is doing some incredible things in Albany and inviting different productions to the city to film. So it was a real treat for the kids to meet her and hear about that. We also, the Albany Pine Bush staff put together a lot of really fun activities for the night too. So the film festival wasn't just showing the films, but it was also participating in some fun activities like doing some animation and shadow puppets and things like that. So we had a lot of fun with that too. So Grace put together a little compilation from the evening. These are just excerpts.
The 4 stages of life. The adult cuddles and lays eggs. The eggs become larvae, the larva becomes a pupa, and then the pupa becomes an adult and lays eggs again.
We found him.
Now let's go get him. No!
This was from a film, one of the films was The Orange Man, so that was one of the characters.
So we had everything from documentary to adventure, suspense to animation. So really it was a wonderful event, lots of creative submissions. And we just wanted to leave you with one of the, show you one of the full-length films. This was done by a family. This family had 4 kids, and they submitted 2 different films. And this one, they had composed the music for it, and I recorded that as well as the artwork that you'll see in the film. So we're looking forward to next year.
Good. Next presentation is Neil Gifford, Habitat Restoration, big picture.
Gotta follow that. Another handout, because it's, you know,
Yeah.
created Air Force Habitat, take the paper. They'll give it all to you. So I wanted to, thank you very much. So Chris and I talked about this a while ago, but really kind of trying to give you some context and perspective on our ecosystem restoration and the big picture. And that's because if you remember about a year ago, Professor Jeff Corbin was here from Union College, and Jeff and his students have been doing some great research in the preserve looking at the effects of our restoration work, particularly restoring black locust cones. But he led, I mean, his research was fantastic, and he taught us a lot, and even in that presentation he taught us a lot. But he also kind of intimated or suggested, and some people walked away from that meeting thinking that restoration isn't working. So this is to try and give you some greater perspective on that, and on what we're doing overall, kind of the 30,000 foot picture of not so much habitat restoration, but ecosystem restoration in the preserve. So this is kind of what we the gestalt that we all think of when we think about the pitch pine scrub barrens, what we expect it restored to look like. But I want everybody to realize, right, so it's just, you know, this open savanna of pitch pine, a few occasional oak trees, and then the understory is kind of this open grassy shrubland or shrubby grassland consisting of all these native plants supporting lots of rare species. Realize this picture took hundreds, if not thousands of years to develop, right, to get to that state. It didn't happen overnight. It's definitely not instant coffee. So as we work to restore non-barrens to barrens, our focus really needs to be system-based. Or in other words, the sites we're managing need to focus on restoring the underlying invisible processes that work to create and maintain the system, you know, over the last 12,000 years. So I wanted to focus on that a little bit. And I hope that over the next few minutes, we'll all understand that what it looks like today, any of these restoration sites, is far less important than knowing if we're creating and facilitating the natural processes that will enable natural ecological healing in all these sites and across the landscape. We care about the parts, obviously, we care about the species, but as you'll see, those underlying processes are incredibly important. Focusing on enabling and facilitating those processes is really the goal. So not to take y'all back to school, but I did want to spend a second talking about what is an ecosystem. We hear this word a lot, but do we really think about what it means? An ecosystem is simply a community, right? There's all the parts, the living and non-living things. It's all the plants and animals, the fungi, the bacteria, all the things that are out there, living amongst in a community with themselves, but also with the non-living environment, with the soil, with the climate, with water, etc. To me, the fascinating thing about ecology is that all of those things, the living and non-living, are interacting in this multifaceted network or system. It's a system that is linked together through complex nutrient cycles and energy flows, most of which we don't see. The biggest process we see here is actually fire, right? And that's one of the key things that why we're putting fire on the ground is that it is a facilitating process by itself. But our goal overall, when we think about what's happening in any individual site, is really focusing on restoring the system, not just the parts, but all those invisible linkages, because we ultimately care about function. So all of these species are important, but just as important are all those invisible connections that enable them. And we'll talk about some of them, you know. You can't have pitch pine trees without soil fungi. You can't have carnivores without lupin. And that is super, super simplistic. The level of detail, you could do a whole graduate level ecology course on the ecology of the pine woods, just focusing on all those invisible networks. We're not going to do that today. But I did want to give you some context. The system dynamics in some of the species are more or less the same, but the pine bush ecosystem, if you will, based on NatureServe, the Natural Heritage Program, is an inland pine barren. The technical term is a northeastern interior pine barren. It's a bit of a mouthful. We frequently just say inland pine barren. It's different than a coastal pine barren. But it's made up of 4 successional variants. So if you think about the pitch pine scrub oak barrens here, it's a continuum that ranges through these 4 parts. And the continuum starts with grasses and wildflowers. All of the species within all 4 of these, there's some common denominators. Common denominators like the soil, fire, the relative abundance of these species across the successional variances, the frequency, severity, season of fire, all varies. But this is the natural range of variability, if you will, of pitch pine scrub oak barrens. The Heritage Program classifies these as ecological communities. So we've got successional northern sandplain grassland, which is what many of our former locust sites look like. But so those sites are on the pine barrens continuum. Pitch pine scrub oak barrens, the true ecological community, that gestalt we all think of as being restored. We want everything to look like that. We'll talk more about that in a second. Is the globally rare community, but then we have pitch pine scrub oak thickets, and then ultimately pitch pine scrub oak forest. And think about this as a continuum, but based on a variety of events. These things exist in space and through time, depending on fire frequency, fire season, fire severity, other kinds of disturbances. They can transition from one to the other. But what I hope you'll understand by the end of this short presentation is that our goal is to really make sure that our restoration sites are on this continuum, and we're facilitating those natural processes, everything from soil fungi, to nutrient cycling, to fire. Our goal is to get sites on this continuum. What we ultimately need to try and figure out is how much of each of these component systems that we need on the landscape. The other thing I want you to think about is that when the Heritage Program and NatureServe initially identified and defined pitch pine scrub oak barrens and high quality pitch pine scrub oak barrens, all the sites they were looking at to develop those definitions were all deteriorating. They were all lacking fire. Predominantly, they were mostly thicket. And all around the Northeast, where people are managing pitch pine scrub oak barrens, they were looking at thickets being the goal. And we, the Commission, are really leaders in helping understand that actually the ultimate goal in many cases is this open grassy shrubland underneath the savanna. And that's based on a whole bunch of research that we've done, particularly with corner blues and other wildlife, because you're not going to get lupin to grow in this. There's no way that this place used to support tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of corner blue butterflies when it existed as a thing. Lupin can't be persistent in that shade. That's why corners end up being listed as endangered and being threatened with extinction locally. This condition and that condition don't support corners. But the idea is we want to get all of our restoration sites on this continuum somehow. And ultimately, we as a staff, we're working with the Heritage Program to define how much of each of these we need on the landscape. And you'll see why I think in a second. So we are ultimately focused. We talk a lot about corners. It's not really about corners. It's about functional pine barrens. So our system-based conservation strategy focuses on 2 things. One is restoring non-barrens to barrens communities. So getting the stuff that's not barrens, most of which now is forest. In one case, it's a former parking lot, right? Onto that barrens continuum using a variety of tools. I just happen to use the logging picture here, but you've seen all these tools that we used before. I'm not going to go into a great level of detail. But then ultimately, once we have them on that barrens continuum, managing them with fire, whether we want to keep them as they are, as grassland or barrens or thicket, or by manipulating fire and doing some planting and things to move them along that continuum to where we want them to be. But restoring the fire regime is really largely the key ecological process here, and that's why the law, all the way back in 1988, that created the preserve, said you need to create a preserve for barrens and you need to manage it with fire. It's right in the law. So we've used a variety of these tools, right? You've seen many of these before. We've cleared now close to 370 acres of locust in the preserve, highlighted in blue on this map. And we've taken those, what Heritage calls successional southern hardwood forests, and pretty rapidly, within a couple of years, put them back on the pine barrens continuum of successional northern sandplain grasslands. We then started burning them, doing a little bit of planting, put corner blues out there, lupin, and that's really what helped us jumpstart our corner blue butterfly recovery, utilizing those sites for corners. Over time, those sites should start transitioning to these other ecological communities. So we've been successful. Don't let anybody tell you that our locust restoration has not been successful, because it has, not only specifically for any individual site, but also in the grand scheme of what we're looking to do with the landscape at 30,000 foot, right? The 13,000 acre study area boundary. We are definitely moving the bar. We've turned what was a non-native, invasive, weedy mess that had zero value for pitch pine strip oak barren species and communities that we care about, and turned it into endangered species habitat, not just corners, but a whole bunch of other barren wildlife that we care about, utilize those sites. Pollinators, insects, ants, bees, birds, reptiles and amphibians, all of that. And Professor Corbin's presentation really kind of showed us this, but it simply said we're not at barrens yet. So if you look at this cluster here, to the left is just an ordination. Don't worry about the axes. But what you see is the locust clones cluster together, which you would expect in space and time. The barrens cluster together in space and time. And all of our restoration sites, depending on how old they are somewhere in between. But we knew that. And to us, to me, as the conservation director, to staff, this is hugely successful. We've taken something we have to get rid of and covered hundreds and hundreds of acres and turned it, put it on the pine barrens continuum in the, on the spectrum for pine barrens. And what we're seeing, clearly with Jeff's research, is that over time they are transitioning and getting more and more like barrens. Now, I've walked, after Jeff's presentation, one of the first things I did was I went and walked literally every single locust site, former locust site that we restored. Just to get a sense of, is it a function of his sampling regime, how they were conducting the research, why didn't any of this woody plant cover in particular pop up in his research? But when I sent Jeff an email earlier in the week and said, can you send me your title slides, don't use it as a prop for this presentation, his comment back to me was, I took my class to kill locust in Blueberry Hill last week and I saw lots of oak seedlings. And I've walked all of these sites, and outside of the last couple of years of the oaks we've removed, you will find scrub oak and oak seedlings in many of these sites. It's not yet at the level of barrens, but in particular, the successional northern sandplain grassland, which is what this is. Here's the DC field, right? There's the Discovery Center in the background, the traffic light. This site is now littered with lots of small scrub oak seedlings that you can't see, and lots of scrub oak that you can see. And on top of that, Jesse and his staff planted pitch pine seedlings several years ago, and those are doing very well out in that field. So we are seeing. So again, the question for us should be, not only is it looking more like barrens, but are we facilitating moving it from locust to grassland to barrens over time? Do we need to do it inside of a couple of years? No. We need to make sure that long term we're pushing these sites toward that goal. And as you can see in this picture, we are. And as Jeff noted. But it's not just about locust, right? Locust is one thing we're doing. We've removed 1,100 acres of aspen across the preserve. And in most cases, those northern successional hardwood forests have lots of pine barren plants left in them, and they pretty rapidly are resembling more like pitch pine strip barrens than grassland. Similar story with pitch pine oak forest and Appalachian oak pine forest. We've thinned over 500 acres of these native tree species, and rapidly, depending on the level of white pine that was there, how much understory was left, some of them resemble the grasslands. Many of them are more likely resembling pitch pine scrub oak barrens. Appalachian oak pine and pitch pine oak forest, almost like instant barrens to me. That within a couple of years, you're quickly moving in the right direction. Scrub oak, again, when we first started, the pitch pine scrub oak barrens we had were really pitch pine scrub oak thickets, dense thickets of scrub oak. You couldn't walk through, you couldn't see over. So we've managed thin scrub oak on over 334 acres in the preserve, as you can see on the map, and moved those barrens from thicket, moved those sites from thicket to high quality barrens. That's pitch pine scrub oak barrens restoration. And these sites helped us with corners. These sites got us over the bar, turning this into that. And as you'll see, not only corners, but lots and lots of other species. That grassy shrubland, shrubby grassland is really where it's at for many of the rare species. And then over time, we're going to manage all of these with fire, depending on when we burn, how frequently we burn, what kind of fire intensity we get, what what kind of fire effects we get, we can maintain these as any one of these individual communities or transition them over time from one to another. And that's what fire would have done naturally at the landscape. Super intense, all-consuming crown fire and excessive drought here in the middle of the growing season is going to turn this into this or that. And all kinds of shades of gray in between, depending on when it burns, how frequently it burns, and how hot it burns. And the prescribed fire we've applied as far as a single footprint on the, we've burned over 2,000 acres now in the preserve, but many of the double count we've burned sites more than once. But the footprint is about 1,300 acres in the preserve that we've managed with fire. So what does that look like on the ground? This is a draft. By the end of the month, we'll have the final version of this from the Natural Heritage Program, but we're taking high-resolution, multi-spec satellite imagery, three different dates, and we ground truth all of that data to look at what plant communities are on the ground, and then they're mapping that to natural heritage community types in the preserve. And this is the whole study area boundary plus the Schenectady Pine Barrens Complex out at the Woodlawn Preserve, Niskayuna, Rotterdam, and in the city of Schenectady. But the bulk of the preserve is here. Eventually I'll have a nice map for you of just the preserve land and what's outside of the preserve. But this tannish color is pitch pine scrub oak barrens. This darker gray, brownish color is pitch pine scrub oak thicket. This light green, these are all the most recent locust sites. They're successional northern sandplain grassland. And then all this green color here, heritage classified as pitch pine oak forest. And then embedded within that, particularly along the ravines, you've got Appalachian oak pine forest, which is basically oak and white pine. And the brown is aspen, red maple, black cherry forest, and this bright reddish purplish color is black locust or successional southern hardwoods. So what this is going to allow us to do is look at the whole study area boundary, all 6,000 plus acres of remaining open space, figure out what's there and compare it to what we had in the past, and we'll be able to crunch some numbers for you. I don't have those numbers yet, but I did want you to see this and see what we're working on with heritage. But really, again, this is really this is a picture of the dominant plant communities, right? The plant communities are not the ecosystem; that's just some of the parts. Ultimately, what we care about is ecosystem function, and this is why, as commission staff, the science staff, we spend a lot of time focusing on monitoring the wildlife. I don't live out there. You all don't live out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, seasonally, year-round. The wildlife are the best representation or indicator we have of ecosystem function. They're the ones that have to find nesting sites, food, water, all this stuff that's going on out there. So ultimately for us, particularly for these rare species that the state and the feds care about, the 76 wildlife species of greatest conservation need, the federally endangered carnival butterfly, the frosted elephant is a candidate for listing right now. That's the sister cousin of this insect that will probably be listed in the coming years. Ultimately, what we're concerned about is not only the population levels up, but is their distribution in the preserve going up? Are we finding them at more places? And is their population going up? Because if it is, that means the habitat we're managing is supporting their essential life functions. Again, I don't live out there, you don't live out there, they do. So we rely on the wildlife, their distribution and abundance over time, particularly in places we manage, to tell us if we're moving the ecosystem in the right direction. Well, we don't have, there is no reference community for pitch pine scrub oak barrens. Nobody, anywhere, has any quantitative information about what this place looked like. So you can look at it, like if you went to the tallgrass prairie today, the tropical rainforests, maybe the tundra and taiga, and say, here's super high quality, you've got all this wildlife data, all this plant data, this is what you need to recreate or restore someplace else. That doesn't exist for pitch pine scrub oak barrens. We're figuring that out as we go. What we do have historically is wildlife data. We know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, there were hundreds of thousands of carnival butterflies in this landscape historically. We have great historical bird data. So if we're successful in restoring this landscape and this ecosystem, we'll see the wildlife respond. And to me and to us, that's the best indicator of whether or not we're actually restoring the full ecosystem and ecosystem function. And it's not just any particular species like carners or prairie warblers. It's a suite of things across all these different groups, birds, reptiles and amphibians, insects. Collectively, that's our indicator. That's why we spend so much time on monitoring wildlife. the Carter blue is the best example, right? The Carter blue is threatened with extinction here, which granted was a problem if you care about Carter blues. To me, as an ecologist, this is a symptom of a much bigger problem. Just like invasive species are today, you know, southern pine beetle moving into Long Island, decimating the pitch pines down there. It's a symptom of poor ecosystem health, of poor ecosystem viability. And our goal is to restore ecosystem viability. We would want to see these wildlife indicators responding in a positive direction. And now, right, the dotted line is the 3,000 adult butterfly recovery threshold. So this includes 2018 data. Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Steve crunched this for us to have for the meeting. You can see what, for the last 6 years, we've been above, for the last 7 years, we've been above the federal recovery threshold, but that's a threshold. They simply tell us we need at least 3,000 butterflies. Well, insect populations do this over time. How many butterflies do we need to have so that we never drop below that line? Grad student, PhD, figured out we need at least 7,500 and change. So that was our target, that's our population target, to have at least that many in any given year, to ensure that we don't fall below this line and put ourselves back at risk of extinction locally. So as you can see, you know, we're anywhere from the high in 2015 was around 18,000. This year, it's in the quarterly update. The second brood this year was around a little over 13,000. The first brood was a little over 7,000. So we're there. It's working for Carners, but not just Carners, lots of the other species as well. But why does all this really matter? Why is it important to put these sites on a continuum? For a couple of reasons, and they all relate to long-term threats. We think about the preserve a lot. The preserve isn't done yet, right? We've protected, Stephen is not there. We've protected 3,300, in science everything isn't measured. We've protected 3,300 acres so far, but our ultimate goal is around 5,380 acres to be protected. The reason that that's in the management plan as a requirement, right? All those full protection areas, we consider them necessary to create a viable preserve, because you can't fully have ecosystem function unless you're protecting as much of this landscape as you can. So there's a lot of work to do, and because of, you know, the development pressure on that unprotected land, the lack of fire and invasive species. There's a lot of things that we can try and do as we continue to. You can see that, you know, we're building a jigsaw puzzle, and there's a lot of open space left to protect, particularly in the northwestern section of the preserve. So building the preserve matters, but also other long-term threats relate to climate change. Why is it important to make sure that all these restoration sites are someplace on the Pine Barrens continuum? Because things are changing that are way beyond our control locally. I got two slides here to try and summarize this, and we've got a great relationship now with the SUNY Department of Atmospheric Sciences. They provided this data, which Steve crunched. Steve analyzed all that data using software that I don't understand. But I'm going to show you two. This is maximum, the next one's minimum temperatures, and the seasons that we have listed here is the calendar season. So, you know, fall starts Saturday, so that's the seasons you see here relate to your calendar seasons. So what we see with the maximum high temperatures over time is for fall and summer, they're relatively flat. More recently, you might see a bit of an incline here, only time will tell. We consider 2 degrees being significant. So these are less than 2 degrees, so we don't consider that trend really significant. We can't say, you know, it's getting hotter in the fall or hotter in the summer necessarily. But in the spring, we are approaching a 2-degree difference, Celsius. So winter and spring seems to be getting warmer. The highs seem to be getting higher. But not a huge change. But you compare that to the average minimum temperatures over the season. So while the top isn't getting very much warmer, the floor is rising. All 4 seasons. You're seeing the lows in fall, summer, spring, and winter are getting warmer. That has huge implications on species movement. Why is southern pine beetle now on Long Island? Why did we find it here last fall? This is why. A lot of these species, plants, animals, insects, are controlled not so much by the highs in the summer, but by the lows in the winter. So the fact that it's less cold, if you will, has big implications for the distribution of plants and animals. Some species, I mean, southern pine beetle is a native animal that's moving north in response to climate change and abundant food. It's kind of what we want native species to do, right? It's not decimate. So southern pine beetle, as an example, shouldn't really be that big of a problem on Long Island if the Long Island Pine Barrens was a healthy, functioning ecosystem. The reason we're working with DEC to study southern pine beetle here is because we think we have, in many of our sites, a healthy, functioning ecosystem. So southern pine beetle should be able to do what it does throughout its native range down south, coexist. with pitch pine, longleaf pine, shortleaf pine, slash pine, because of the way they manage those forests down there to be more functional, more healthier. We're still harvesting timber, but this is important. So for us, I want you to walk away with the notion we are indeed succeeding at the grand scale of restoring inland pine barrens. The biggest message from me today, and my staff know because I say it all the time, restoration is a process, it's not an event. Right? It took hundreds and hundreds of years to develop and to have this system developed. And in particular for us, it's those invisible foundational systems, fire, nutrients, water, that are so important to the things that we actually can see. So as much as we worry about what we see, we also need to worry about what's going on behind the scenes, if you will. Maintaining all pine barrens variants is going to maximize the benefits to rare species in the long term. And this gets to the next bullet too. Landscape level threats continue, so maintaining all the variants maximizes our probability for success. What happens, for example, so we've taken a locust cone and we now have it as a grassland. And we have maintained some of those grasses in the landscape. But what happens if funding fails? Or because of climate change, we're not able to burn when we need to burn to get the desired effect because it's wetter, or it's too dry or too wet. Realize we're burning in that Goldilocks zone, right? It's got to have a little bit of wind, it's got to be a little moist but not too moist, it's got to be a little dry but not too dry. What happens if it, with the result of climate change, that burn window shifts over time and we're not able to get in when we need to get in, to burn for several years, to have the desired impact? We don't want to just make the sites black when we burn them. We're looking for effects of those fires. By maximizing these different ages and successional variants on the landscape, we're ensuring that should things happen, we're not able to do what we need to do in the shorter term, we're going to maximize the probability of those species persist in the landscape long term. In other words, we don't want all our eggs in one basket. I would not want the whole preserve to look like Hunter because it's all going to succeed at the same time. You want to have it, we want to have it distributed across those successional variants to maximize the benefit of the species and ensure that it's going to persist in the long term. Then ultimately, that means in the face of climate change, it means our goal related to climate change is increasing the landscape or the ecosystem's resilience to the changes that are coming. By getting honeybee butterfly populations and other rare species real high, we ensure that you saw that graph bouncing around for the last couple of years, that's the winters. So Carnes overwinters eggs. One bad winter can knock that thing down from 13,000 to 3,000. So by keeping that population real large, we can maximize our probability that Carnes will persist on the landscape longer term. The same is true for all the other species. So maximizing our ability to create these pine barren variants on the landscape in all of the successful forms is going to increase the resilience of this landscape for the species that depend on it. So, sorry, that's a little dense, but so am I. Do you all have any questions?
You can always count them. So the graph of the winter data getting warmer, and that impacts species. So it seems to me, just anecdotally in my own head, that the winter data is like extreme colder and extreme warmer, and so the average might be going to chunk.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yes.
But does it?
Yes, because species exist, right? Their niche, if you will, exists within their own Goldilocks range. And it's not so much, and Steve and I talk about this a lot with Connors, it's not so much that the average is changing, but if they exist from here to here, and you get weather that puts you here or here, it can decimate the population. So if that's your question, yeah, we are concerned about that. But again, the beauty of the pine bush amongst all the other pine barrens, we have this dune system, all the rest of them are flat. So from a microclimate perspective, all your eggs are in one basket. The dunes here give us a lot of diversity of microclimates. A little bit hotter, a little bit cooler, a little bit drier, a little bit wetter. So I think that will also help us. So by increasing the population size and ensuring that we have some of these species all over the place, we can minimize that impact in the short term. Real long term, I sit on the federal recovery team for the carnival butterfly, and we're thinking about climate change, modeling the climate envelope for Connors, and where they're likely going to be in the future in 50 to 80, 100 years. It's going to be north of here, not for all intents and purposes. So our goal is also to make sure we're maximizing our ability to keep them here as long as possible, while other sites like parks or DEC lands or, you know, provincial parks in Canada have time to restore and create habitat and then move species? But that's a great question. Steve?
You talk about the importance of all these, kind of cryptic invisible processes. And still, the monitoring and the kind of assessment of evaluating where we are is mostly species-based, right? And I guess other opportunities, other conversations among people for trying to figure out ways to kind of monitor and assess some of these processes other than, we know we burned here, we know we burned there.
Yes, you did some of that research with mineralization of nutrients.
So are there conversations with managers and people trying to figure out ways you can do that? Because that's pretty difficult
To
thing
some
to
degree,
get
most
at.
managers are still figuring out across the Northeast, most managers are looking to figure out how to get capacity to do the management they want to do and monitor the species. Yeah, so to a much lesser degree, there are much more academic questions that managers and management staff like us are less qualified to try and investigate, and that's where academic partnerships like what we have with you and so forth. Yeah, so they're great questions, and so you and Jeff have helped us understand what's going on with nutrients, and that we are taking the nutrient cycling that's happening in our locust phone, and now much more resembles the nutrient cycling that happens in barrens. We're working with Tom Portman and his grad students at SUNY ESF to understand, the invisible world of fungi in the soil. You can't have pitch pine or oaks or tree oaks or anything, any woody plant really growing well on dry, xeric, well-drained sites unless you have the right fungi in the soil. Because if I'm the tree and my roots go this big, but I have this symbiotic relationship with a fungal network that's as big as this room, that's how pines and oaks persist in barrens. And those relationships are really unique. So SUNY ESF is helping us understand some of that stuff. So we're going to understand all of them? No, but we are trying to understand the key ones. Yes,
It seems to me timeframes are also very
Absolutely.
important on something
Absolutely.
like this. If you looked at, how long, if we don't manage it, is it going to be to go from, let's say, grasslands to thicket versus, how much tweaking do we have to do to get it there in a faster
restarting.
thing?
We have not done that as much as we probably should or could, but also just working with, getting a snapshot, working with Heritage to have this community mapping done every 5 years is going to help us a lot. Yeah. Ultimately, we manage sites, we can get into some sites we can get into more frequently, some sites we can't. The cool thing is for me is the relationship between fire, fungi, and the woody plants. Fire manipulates the nutrient cycling, which facilitates and enables a lot of the fungi. Those fungi that enable the plants, and the plants enable wildlife. And that's why I study ecology. That's the cool stuff.
He's got to be so much fun at a party. Have you seen a narrowing of the fire window?
Say that again.
Have you seen a narrowing of the fire window?
It looks like it's changing. The big issue is kind of what Elaine was alluding to, in that extreme events are getting more frequent and bigger. And the crazy thing is, whether it's NASA government models or academic models that kind of predicted that would be one of the outcomes of climate change, what they failed on is predicting how frequently they're changing and how much bigger those events are getting. The recent hurricane is a good example, even though it's only a category 1 with landfall, the amount of moisture it had. Ocean's warmer, air's warmer, can hold more moisture, then you get fronts and things that it sits there, but ultimately, the magnitude of those things are changing.
And is the bigger threat to the fire window here the developments and maybe the desire of residents not to be engulfed in smoke, or is it climate change?
I would lean more towards climate change. We've developed, we've been burning since '91.
Yeah.
Tyler's been doing a great job. Communication education staff. People generally accept that we're burning. I mean, nobody wants smoke in their backyard, right? We always try and burn when that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But no, we don't. I think the long term bigger risk is the burn window changing and creating conditions that we can't get desired effects. And that's not just here, but that's with the whole Pine Barrens Climate Change Initiative across the Northeast, and that's one of the worries. In general, if you look at the averages, warmer and drier should mean good things for pine barrens and poorer things for wood and hardwood forests and other more mesic or moist habitats. but the fire is really the wild card.
Yeah.
Underground. Which again, you know, Tyler's been done a great job. If you think back, we used to burn just in the spring, right? And there was an 8-week window in the spring when I was on seasonal crew in 94, 95. Now we have the ability to burn year round. So we've increased our capacity and trying to adapt to dealing with some of those things. So he's always ready. Whenever he gets weather, he's gonna go out there and try and burn. We're waiting to get one in January. 2 months of the year we haven't hit yet. Thank you very much. And sorry that was a little dense, but I thought it was important to try and provide some of that content.
Very good.
I think both of those presentations were outstanding. Okay, I guess we won't be breaking for executive session. No executive session this meeting, so our next board meeting is going to be in December 20th. So mark that on your calendars. I guess I can have a motion to adjourn. Okay, unless there's anything else anybody wants to bring up.
Just one. You mentioned the bird banding tent. So the rest of the science staff and volunteers are up at the Discovery Center loop here. In the little outdoor classroom, you'll see a white tent banding birds all morning. So if anybody after the meeting wants to go up, we have one of our bird banding volunteer extraordinaires, Nancy, who can help get you up there.
It's amazing to go up. I would recommend it's a short trek.
It's like a semi-paved trail. You're not,
Yes,
if you have nice
you're
shoes
not-
on, you're not gonna get dirt. Or you're not gonna sink.
Right, you don't have to go out in the
Thanks, Chris.
It is paved, right up the.
Remember that training on Tuesday, okay?
You're ahead.
Anything else? Okay, motion to adjourn. Second.